What if one man could stand against an entire nation and win? What if markets driven by fear, belief, and illusion were more powerful than governments, laws, or central banks? In 1992, a single trade shook the British economy. The Bank of England lost billions, a global currency system collapsed, and at the center of it all stood one investor, George Soros. To some, he was a villain, to others, a visionary. But in reality, he was something far more dangerous. A man who understood how human belief shapes economic reality. George Soros did not believe markets were efficient. In fact, he believed the opposite. Traditional economic theory assumes that markets reflect reality, that prices are based on accurate information. Soros rejected this idea completely. He argued that markets are driven by human perception, and human perception is flawed. This belief became the foundation of his philosophy, known as reflexivity. Reflexivity suggests that financial markets do not merely reflect economic conditions, they actively shape them. Investors form beliefs. Those beliefs influence their decisions, and those decisions change prices, which then reinforce the original beliefs. A feedback loop is created. When prices rise, confidence increases. When confidence increases, risk-taking follows. Credit expands. Leverage builds. Eventually, perception moves far beyond reality. Soros believed these distortions were not rare accidents, they were the natural state of markets. Booms are fueled by optimism. Busts are triggered when reality can no longer support belief. The key, according to Soros, was timing, a search for moments when a widely accepted economic idea was fundamentally wrong, but still supported by policy, emotion, or political pressure. And when he found those moments, he acted aggressively, not with small bets, but with massive conviction. Soros once said his goal was simple: identify a false trend, ride it, and exit before it collapses. This approach required more than data. It required understanding psychology, power, and human behavior. That is why Soros wasn't just betting on markets. He was betting against belief itself. George Soros never saw himself as a traditional investor. He was not interested in holding assets for decades or waiting patiently for slow growth. Instead, Soros described himself as a speculator who was willing to place enormous, highly leveraged bets when he believed the odds were clearly in his favor. His hedge fund became famous for a strategy known as global macro investing. This approach focuses on the big picture, entire economies, government policies, interest rates, inflation, and currency movements. Rather than analyzing individual companies, Soros studied nations. He watched central banks, he listened to politicians, and most importantly, he looked for contradictions between policy and economic reality. Soros believed that governments often try to fight economic forces instead of accepting them. They delay the inevitable by printing money, fixing exchange rates, or raising interest rates against market pressure. In the short term, these actions may appear successful, but in the long run, Soros believed, they only make the collapse more violent. When Soros identified such a situation, he did not hesitate. He increased his position as his confidence grew. If the market moved against him, he cut his losses quickly. But when the fundamentals confirmed his view, he attacked with full force. This is why many compared Soros to a gambler. But unlike a gambler, his decisions were based on deep economic understanding, not luck. To Soros, markets were not random. They were emotional systems driven by fear, greed, and political pressure. And those emotions, when pushed too far, always left behind a trail of opportunity. George Soros believed that economic cycles are not accidents. They are the natural outcome of human behavior. At the heart of every boom lies a simple idea: belief changes reality. When an economy begins to grow, confidence rises. Investors feel safer. Banks lend more freely. Risk suddenly feels manageable. Prices start to climb. As prices rise, people assume the growth is justified. They do not question it because the market itself appears to confirm their belief. This is where reflexivity takes control. Higher prices encourage more borrowing. More borrowing fuels more investment. And more investment pushes prices even higher. Reality begins to bend. Consider the housing market. When property prices increase, homeowners feel wealthier. They spend more. Developers build aggressively. Governments celebrate growth. But demand has limits. Eventually, too many homes are built. Too much debt is taken on, and the system becomes fragile. Yet most participants do not see the danger. Why? Because during a boom, Warning signs are dismissed. Skeptics are ignored. And anyone who questions the trend is called pessimistic or wrong. Soros understood that markets stay irrational longer than logic suggests, but he also knew they cannot stay irrational forever. The turning point comes when reality can no longer support belief. A small shock, rising interest rates, slowing demand, or political change can trigger panic. Confidence collapses. Credit dries up. Prices fall faster than they rose. What once felt permanent suddenly feels obvious in hindsight. To Soros, the goal was never to predict the exact moment of collapse. It was to recognize when a cycle had become unsustainable and position himself before the illusion shattered. Because when belief breaks, markets move with brutal speed. By 1992, Britain was trapped. The country had tied its currency, the British pound, to the European exchange rate mechanism. The goal was political stability. The cost was economic reality. Britain promised to keep the pound above 2.7 German marks. But the fundamentals were working against it. Germany had low inflation. Britain did not. To maintain the fixed exchange rate, the British government was forced to fight the market. Interest rates were raised, even as the economy slipped deeper into recession. Unemployment was rising. Businesses were struggling, yet policy refused to bend. George Soros saw the contradiction clearly. A country in recession cannot defend an overvalued currency forever. Printing money to stimulate growth only weakened the pound further. To Soros, the outcome was inevitable. So he acted. Soros and other speculators began selling the pound on a massive scale. They borrowed sterling, sold it, and waited for its value to fall. The pressure was immediate. In response, the Bank of England spent nearly $26 billion of its foreign currency reserves. Interest rates were raised again desperately. Still, the market did not believe them. Confidence evaporated. The pound plunged. Within hours, the illusion collapsed. Britain withdrew from the ERM. The fixed exchange rate was abandoned, and the pound was left to fall freely. George Soros reportedly made over $1 billion in a single day, but Soros later insisted it was never about power or destruction. He was simply betting that economic reality would win, and on that day, reality did. After the collapse of the British pound, George Soros became a global symbol. To the public, he was the man who broke the Bank of England. To governments, a warning. To markets, a reminder of their true power. Yet Soros himself rejected the title. He said he was only one of many traders selling the pound. If others had not shared the same belief, nothing would have happened. That is the paradox of financial markets. No single individual controls them, but when belief becomes collective, the result is unstoppable. That single trade earned Soros more than $1 billion, an amount equivalent to taking roughly $12 from every British citizen at the time. But the real value of the event was not the profit. It was the lesson. Markets do not collapse because of speculators. They collapse because reality is ignored for too long. Governments delay pain, companies hide weakness, investors chase comfort over truth. Eventually, the cost arrives. Soros's strategy was never about predicting the future. It was about recognizing when a widely accepted story was wrong and positioning himself accordingly. This lesson extends beyond currencies. Corporations take excessive debt. Stock prices rise without justification. Risk is disguised as innovation. For everyday investors, the takeaway is simple but powerful. Do not blindly trust the narrative. Question assumptions. Watch for gaps between belief and reality. Because when perception breaks, markets move fast and without mercy. George Soros did not create chaos, he understood it. And that understanding made all the difference. So the next time you hear that markets are rational, remember this story. Because history shows us that prices are not driven by logic alone. They are driven by belief. George Soros didn't win because he predicted the future. He won because he recognized when reality and perception were moving in opposite directions. And that gap is where opportunity lives. If you found this breakdown valuable, let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think, was Soros a genius or simply a product of the system? If you enjoy deep dives into financial history, market psychology, and the forces that move the global economy, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the markets, understanding matters more than certainty.